Hello everybody, it is time for another video, and today's video is going to be a revisit to the topic of Catasetum culture. Now we are headed into the Catasetum blooming season, and in fact some Catasetums, the earliest bloomers, have already been blooming, and some people have had some, even Cloisias, which are notable for most of them being winter bloomers, blooming right now. So I've got a handful of Catasetums, but I've had some of them for a while, and some of them are fairly new. This is one of the older ones of the ones I have. This is uh, Cycnodes Wine Delight. It's starting to open its first few buds, and this one will start to smell really good soon. But as you can see, it's full growth, it's blooming, it's doing its thing. But this is the time of year these will bloom, is the summer into fall. And they'll bloom multiple times, sometimes even. But this one, and all the others that I have that are really going, like this one's really cool. This is Catasetum tigrinum Kleberianum. So this one's a fairly new one. It's still in its original pot from Fred and everything. That one's new. But some of them are not, like the Wine Delight I've had a couple years now. And they are fabulous plants, but they have some notable intricacies with their culture that need to be kept in mind. And I'll go out to the others in a little bit, but just want to take another one. Let's look at these. Can't wait for them to be fully open, but the color on those, it really developed quickly. They were a lot greener just a couple days ago, and now 2 days later they're opening and fully colored. But most of my Catasetums are over here. They sit over here in this little tray in the dappled sun, so they get lots of light but aren't overheating. So I have a few, like this one's a new one, Millie's Philly Dragon crossed on Hat Trick. This one's an older one. This is Catasetum Philidoris, Cygnodes Wurtzevichii. So I have a handful, and so they all require pretty much the same care. They just bloom at different times. This one should be spiking soon, Dentigrianum. It's looking good. This is our Catasetum project plant for high desert orchids, also looking really good. So the things to note about these is, as of right now, obviously it's late. It's late summer. Summer doesn't technically end until mid to late September, but it is summer, the end of summer, going into fall, and some of these plants are going to be finishing up their growth and blooming. Others are going to be finishing up their growth and preparing to shed. But we should see in the next couple months the start of shedding. They should be fully dormant by December, but some of mine have taken longer. So the things to note about these is, you see that this bulb here was the last bulb to grow. It's leafless. They will lose their leaves and go dormant, and so all previous bulbs on a plant should be leafless. This one is different because it grew this bulb and then grew this one after this year. So it's got two bulbs this year. So they're pretty easy though. A lot of people are scared of Catasetums because of their dormancy and their specificness, and they're tempted to water when they shouldn't. They're a lot easier than people think, I promise. So please don't feel afraid of them, and hopefully this video will help. So since I only have examples of growing Catasetums, I can only show these right now, but I will talk about dormancy as well. So we'll start with winter. Winter, the Catasetums are dormant. They should be leafless, barely starting to grow, if at all, and some of the later bloomers, like some of the Fred Clarkiaras and the Cloisias, should be flowering around this time. Even when Catasetums are if they're flowering during dormancy, still do not water them. They do this normally in their natural habitat, so don't water them. You don't want to water them hardly at all unless you're in a really dry climate. If you live out in the desert somewhere, then it would be good to give them a little bit of water here and there, but just a little bit. And we're talking like mist to the top of the media or the plant, just a little bit of something to keep them from shriveling too much. A little bit of shriveling is actually normal and expected. So with these types of orchids, when they begin to grow in spring, they'll start putting out a little nubbin of growth. And I know, of course, since it's the wrong time of year, you're not going to see it on any of these. But they're going to put on a little nubbin of growth. It'll be a little green thing coming from the base. It might look like a spike sometimes, but it isn't. Even though it's still starting to grow, still don't water it. They're very particular around this time because if you water too soon, you can rot the bulbs or the new growth. And if you water too late, then they are severely dehydrated and stunted. The general rule of thumb that I follow myself is the roots are a couple inches long, and the growth, or not and the growth has begun to leaf out. And this is noted by it'll instead of being a tight little green nub, the leaves are starting to separate and spread out at the tip of the growth. When you see these two traits, that's when you begin to water, and you do it lightly by misting the media or dripping a little bit of water in there, because they don't come all the rains don't come all at once. So they just will start watering them slowly, because the roots aren't very well used to taking in water yet. They actually won't be good for taking in water well until summer. And so the thing to note about that is you water slowly building up over the next few weeks until they are in full growth. Water too soon, which is when the roots aren't formed or barely formed, or when the growth is still not leafing out, and you could risk rotting the bulb because the plant's not actively taking up water yet. The previous year's roots aren't really good for a whole lot beyond stability, but because they do keep the plant mounted if it's mounted, and they keep the plant stable in its pot, but they do not take up water well, if at all. So the media will stay wet and rot those old roots off and the bulbs, and so you want to avoid that at all costs. But that's real easy. You just stash them in a moderately bright window and keep them dry, only watering them a little bit until they are ready. When you see those signs of growth, when the growth is leafing out and the roots are forming. Sometimes that may form differently, though. Something to note. The growth may leaf out well before the first roots form, or like vice versa, where the first roots will form when the growth is very young. As the one you need to really look for is the roots. If the roots are long enough to begin watering, then you can do so regardless of where the leaves are. But generally, I try to get the leaves at the same stage. And this is all happening in the spring when growth is beginning. They'll be pretty slow at first, but once they start getting water, they really shoot off. Like this bulb, that second bulb on Phrylodoris formed in just a few weeks. When you reach the growing season in summer and they're like really starting to take off, late spring, summer, you don't really want to let them dry out. I let them get to about this point where they're still damp, but they're not really fully dry. You can see it's starting to plump up there. And this is perfect because they get a lot of water during the growing season, a lot of food and a lot of water. So you want to fertilize them actively and you want to water them actively. And they're gonna grow until they mature their bulbs in the summer. Like this one's about done. This is Catasetum Culture. When they're done growing and this bulb isn't expanding anymore, I slow down on the water just a little bit. Still let them stay pretty wet, but I don't water them as often or as heavily. And this is just so that because they aren't actively taking as much water in to grow, so they don't need as much, but they still need some. Fall is the time of year where dormancy starts to set in and blooming typically happens, late summer into fall and winter. In fall, usually around October for me, but it might be earlier or later depending on where you live, the temperatures start to fall, the days are shortening, and this means that the catasetums are starting to receive their signals to start shedding. And you'll start to see leaves, the lower leaves, or even all of them at once sometimes, start to yellow. Like this is not ready for dormancy, this is just some dried older leaf tips, but you'll start to see those leaves yellow and fall off. Don't be alarmed about this, they're not dying. They're just responding to the signals that they're getting and preparing for dormancy. The bulbs will harden up if they haven't already, and they will stop taking in water for the most part, and they will shed their leaves and go dormant. And then you'll be back at winter again with bare bulbs. They'll be all like these bulbs are, just bare. They're still green, but they're not actively growing anymore. And you want to stop watering. Now my schedule, and of course you need to adjust it for your own culture or your own environment. My standards are by Halloween, I have halved my watering. If they are done growing, that is. If they're still actively growing, then I don't have them. But on the ones that are done, I have the water. And then I try to have it again by Thanksgiving in November. because I want them to be dormant by by the time Christmas rolls around, or even earlier than that, preferably. I want them mid to early December. And this cutting back of water and the cooling temperatures, as well as the shortening days, signals to the plant that it's time to go dormant and flower for the ones that are fall and winter flowering. And so with that in mind, you want to be watching that, and once you see leaves start to yellow, you want to start cutting back on that water. You don't have to cut back to half all at once, but you start slowing back. Like if you're watering it's like twice a week, pretty heavily, then like lower it to twice a week, a little bit lighter, and just start to reduce the amount of water you give it so that it approaches dryness more or dries out. And this helps signal the plant that it's time to go dormant. During dormancy, like I said before, just stash them somewhere and forget about them, essentially. If you live in a drier climate, you want to mist them or mist the top of the media from occasionally, because that helps keep the bulbs from wrinkling too much. But like I said, a little bit of wrinkling is normal and often expected. And so these plants are pretty easy as a result of that. You just have to pay attention to their signs, and that's Fred Clark's biggest thing, is observation. One of the things key points he made during the speaking he did for my Orchid Society here in Houston. You gotta pay attention to what the plant is telling you. If the plant is still growing, even though the others are going dormant, don't cut it back on water. Keep it growing and keep it working on the others. You see yellow leaves, slow down your watering and cut back your fertilizer as well. I should have mentioned that. You want to feed them pretty heavily during their growth period, but once they stop actively growing, you want to slow down the fertilizer a lot. And by the time you start cutting back your water, I would cut off fertilizer entirely. So Halloween, they shouldn't be getting any more fertilizer for that year. I start fertilizing in spring after the roots have been growing a little ways and they've been getting a little bit of water. Sometimes I'll use little fertilizer pellets. I'm not seeing a whole lot of them left. They keep falling out. There's some. This is NutriCoat. And so that means every time I water, they just get a little bit of fertilizer with each water. And that's about what they expect. Orchids grow adapted to be advantageous of rainfall and nutrients. So as the nutrients wash down the side of a tree during a rainfall, the roots suck them up pretty quickly. But I hope this video helps somewhat, and if you have any more questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I will be posting this to High Desert Orchids as well, to help people out there, because our project plan for 2019 has been announced, and we're going to place the order here soon. So I hope this video helps you kind of get an idea of your scheduling for Catasetums, and if you have any more questions, like I said, please put them in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I do hope you enjoyed this video.